Hello everyone, it's Joe here from Draft FPL. Today I've got my full 176-man rankings based on Draft FPL standard scoring. I'm going to show you the full rankings on screen in the video. I'd appreciate it if you watch the whole thing, of course, but if you do want to skip about to see the rankings, I'll put chapters on the video so you can do that. If you want to see the full spreadsheet, including tabs for each position, then you can get access to that via our Patreon, link and information in the description down below. These videos do take quite a lot of time to make, as I'm sure you can imagine, so if you would like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, that would be very much appreciated. Let's get stuck straight into the top 25 of the rankings. There's no change in any of the top 5, which I suppose isn't too surprising. I think this is all since game week 8 when I last updated the rankings. I don't think that's too surprising just because, you know, there's not been that much fluctuation at the top. Haaland, Salah, KDB, still my top 3 in that order. Then it's Kane and Son. The first man to really go up in the rankings is Saka at number 6. And I think that's more due to other players falling out as opposed to Saka really improving that much. To go from 11 to 6 seems like a lot, but I don't think it actually is that big of a jump. I just think there's other players that have dropped quite significantly. Bruno, similar story as well to Saka. I do fancy him to have quite a good second half of the season. You know, I've spoken at length about how I think Bruno's just a vastly better pick without Ronaldo, and he's obviously now gone. So I'm quite big on all the United boys. I think pretty much all of them have gone up in this ranking compared to the game week 8 one. Next up in 8th is Darwin, and he's got a small rise up from 12th to 8th, and I think that's mainly due to the sort of consistent minutes he's going to get thanks to the injury complications of Diaz and Jota. Trent next, back on top of the defenders. I did in the previous iteration have James ahead of him, but you know, James's injury and not really performing to the standard we had hoped has seen Trent come back on top as the top defender. I do expect Liverpool's defence to be significantly improved in the second half of the season, and all the Liverpool defenders have had a bit of a bump in this. Rounding out the top 10 is Phil Foden. I think he's had a really strong start to the season, and I expect even more from him in the second half. I'm pretty high on Foden. I think he's an absolutely brilliant asset to own, and you know, outside of KDB and Haaland, he's definitely, I think, the next best City option to have. I think he's almost guaranteed to play decent amount of minutes over sustained periods, which, you know, for an attacking mid for City is pretty much all you need, because you know the points are going to come after that. I'm not going to go over every single player throughout the whole 176, otherwise this video will be about 4 hours long. I'm just going to touch on some of the big movers. Rounding out the top 25, I think it's all pretty standard. Kulusevski's had a big jump from 49th to 15th. That's mainly just because he is now back from his injury. Richarlison's out. I would expect to see consistent game time from him now, which is probably his biggest barrier earlier in the season. Sterling's had a pretty big fall from 7th to 17th, which is a shame as an owner of Sterling, but I do think that's pretty fair. I was probably a bit too high on him when Potter took over. I thought, you know, from that first Champions League game we saw, it looked like they were going to really play to Sterling's strengths, but it's yet to be seen if they're going to get the best out of him. Few big jumps as well in the rounding out the top 25. Rashford from 60th to 19th. That was probably a mistake on my part, and I do think also he will now benefit as well from the Ronaldo move. Firmino, I think, has got the high. Well, I'm pretty sure has got the highest jump of any player, from 169th to 21st. Again, maybe a mistake. I thought Firmino was probably over and done with, but with the current injury situation in Liverpool's front line, I feel pretty confident that he's going to get a lot of minutes, and in that attack you'd expect him to get a decent return. Martial's another player that's got the United bump, up 39 places to 22nd. If he can stay fit the rest of the season, I think he's an absolutely brilliant person to have in your roster. Even better than Callum Wilson I've got here, and mainly that's due to, you know, Wilson potentially losing out on some minutes now that all Newcastle's front line are fit, and I think Martial has proved in the past that when he's playing up front he can be quite a prolific goal scorer, so hopefully we see that side of him for the rest of the season. Moving on to the next 25 then, 26th to 50th. Couple of big movers. Almiron up from 98th to 28th. He was just starting that run of form when I made the previous rankings, and I kind of questioned if he could continue. 98th was still a big jump from him even then, I think, but he has continued it, and once again I'm asking the question, can he carry on? If he carries on like he has been, he'll be a top 10 pick. I don't see that happening personally. I think, he's definitely still a good pick, hence why I've got him with the likes of Zaha, Mount, up in this echelon. But I don't think the form we had over the last 10 game weeks is going to carry on. I just don't think that's really possible. But I do think he's still a very, very good pick. A couple of big movers in defence. I think this sort of second tier of defenders after the real big boys is always quite an interesting one, somewhere you can gain quite a lot of ground, I think. Van Dijk and Gabriel I had there previously, not much change for them. But Saliba, Walker and Akanji have all had big jumps, and this is mainly due to just the minutes and the fact that Arsenal's defence is quite a lot better than we expected. So, Saliba not quite as good attacking threat as Gabriel, hence why I've got him behind him, but there's really not that much in it. Walker and Akanji, I think, other than Cancelo, will get the next most minutes for Man City. Next, we've got a tricky trio of forwards, people that I found really, really difficult to rank. Havertz, Aubameyang and Daka. Really struggle with these. It is really tough trying to predict the minutes, looking at their expected output and trying to tally that up with how the teams might improve. I think I've got Havertz marginally ahead of Aubameyang, and I think that's mainly down to the minutes. I think Havertz will get more minutes than Aubameyang, and the expected data for him is marginally better, so I do think he is slightly ahead. I've got Daka reasonably high because I think he's got the spot now over Vardy. Obviously that remains to be seen, and we may see these two basically swap places in the rankings when I next update them, but we will see on that. The next few are all reasonably roughly round where I had them before. Barnes and Odegaard have both gone up a little bit, 27 and 13 places respectively, mainly just due to their really good sustained form. A new entry of Castagna in at 43. At the time of recording the last ranking video, I'm pretty sure Leicester's defence was the worst in the league. So there's quite a few big movers on the Leicester defence. Castagna is my favourite of the pick. He's by far the most attacking, and I think actually a really good pick at the moment. Hence why I've got him up with the likes of Perisic and Romero, the Spurs boys. Another big mover is Scamacca. I think his place in the team is almost cemented now, which puts him up to a pretty decent pick, I think. West Ham attack is okay, and starting strikers are quite hard to come by, so I think having him with the likes of Solanke and Isaac feels about right to me. And next up we've got the 4 United defenders. Varane is on the next page, but I can tell you it's Dalot, Shaw, Martinez and Varane are the next 4. Significant jumps for all of them. I think Shaw and Varane weren't even in the previous video. I think United's defence is just okay. I think it's probably about the 7th or 8th best defence, but they do have a settled back line when they're all fit, which is quite a big bonus and does boost them up the rankings a fair bit. Looking at the next 25 then, or 26 for some reason, I don't know why I did that. We have got Jesus and Nketiah at number 52 and 53. This is really tough as well. I looked at how many game weeks are left in the season, how many Jesus is likely to miss, and how many he's likely to be back for, and it's almost a pretty even split. We've got about 22, I think we've got 22 game weeks left, and I think Jesus will probably miss about 10. Obviously it's hard to tell, but from the information we've got at the moment, I think he'll miss about 10, which gives, if Arsenal don't sign anyone, obviously big if, then that gives Nketiah about 10 starts and Jesus about 12.
Therefore, Jesus slightly ahead of Nketiah still, despite that. But I do think Nketiah is a really, really good pick at the moment. I just think I personally don't see Arsenal signing a centre forward in this window. So I think as a starting striker for currently the best team in the league, it's kind of a no-brainer if he's free, which he is free in almost all leagues at the moment. Next up, we've got a big chunk of what I would call like the second to third tier midfielders, the likes of Andreas Pereira, Eze, Bruno Guimaraes, Gundogan, Rodrigo, Eriksen, Pascal Gross. I think these are all really similar value players, and some of them have had a bit of a boost, some of them a small drop, but this I think is a pretty tight group, and it's really hard to rank players like this, I think, because it's the kind of players I think that if offered one for the other in a trade, most people would reject either side because they'd rather stick with what they got on such an even trade. The next two interesting players are Diogo Jota and Luis Diaz, who have both obviously got significant injuries at the moment. Luis Diaz, I think, is a similar return to play to Jesus, will miss around 10 game weeks if all goes well, and Diogo Jota I think is slightly less than that, about 8 game weeks. So it's tough for these two. The value at this stage of the season, getting a big injury, really does take a big value hit, because when you look at, one player playing 22 game weeks versus another playing only 12, there's quite a big difference there in terms of their expected, point output. So they do have a pretty big hit in the rankings, and I do think this is around where I'd put them. If I owned the likes of Gross, Eriksen, I would consider trading them for Diogo Jota or Luis Diaz. Similar, sort of value in my opinion. Next, we've got a decent chunk of defenders, what I would like to call the boring defenders. Not too much attacking output for most of them, but decent defences. So the likes of Dyer and Davis of Spurs, Botman, Schär, Burner, Newcastle, Koulibaly, Thiago Silva, Thomas and White. I think these are all players that are playing in reasonably decent defensive teams with okay fixtures and with not the best attacking output. Three forwards at the bottom here that have all had quite big moves. Mope has gone up significantly, mainly thanks to DCL's problems. That is almost all down to minutes. And then we've got Watkins and Ings, who in my previous video were ranked 25 for Watkins and 172 for Ings, who are now 75th and 76th, sat next to each other. And I think that's right, because I think Watkins' value has gone significantly down because we don't know if he's going to be a starting striker, and Ings has gone significantly up because we don't know if he's going to be a starting striker, where in game week 8 it looked pretty clear at the time that Watkins was ahead of Ings in the pecking order. I don't think that's the case anymore. Rounding out the top 100, then we've got a fair few new entries. 3 defenders, Fass, Evans and Konate, all of whom I think will be starting defenders when fit for their respective teams. Also a few new midfielders, Bentancur, Willian and Benrahma. Again, players at the time I didn't think would start that now I do. And players that I think are quite interesting as well. I think that midfield little bunch there of Bailey, St Max, Bentancur, Willian and Benrahma are all quite interesting picks. Then we've got the first set of keepers, and it may surprise people that I now have Pope as my number 1 goalkeeper, and I don't think you should be surprised if you are. He's currently the top scoring keeper after 16 game weeks, and I think that will continue. He's got save points bonus in his locker as well. That, along with Newcastle being a decent defensive team, really does put him high up the rankings in my opinion. The next 5 we've got Alisson, Ramsdale, Lloris, Ederson. I think all of those are really close, and I wouldn't argue if you put them in any order really. As most people know, I'm not particularly interested in keepers. I just think the point ceiling is too low to put them too high up the rankings. Next up, we've got a set of forwards that I think are all risky with a little bit of upside potentially. Vardy, Edouard, Jimenez, Bamford, Calvert-Lewin all have their own problems. In the shape of Vardy, it's his age and his likelihood of starting. Edouard doesn't really have that prolificness, with his point scoring. Jimenez hasn't really been the same player for a couple of years. Bamford's injury problems, and the same with DCL as well. From 100 to 125 then, this is where ranking players gets almost impossible, I'd say. And at this stage in the rankings, I would pay much more attention to the rank in position than the rank versus each position, because if you were drafting right now, by the time it gets to this stage, you're much more worried about your team composition. You know, there'll be times when you get to the 10th round where you have all your mids picked, you have all your forwards picked, you think, oh, I've only got 2 defenders, I've only got 2 mids, and you're picking based on position, not just overall rank. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to where I have these players in terms of defence versus midfielders. I pay much more attention to the rank in position, and then I do the overall rankings at the end. So that's something to pay much more attention to, I think. The defenders I've got here are like the mid to lower tier defences with nailed on players, the likes of Dunk, Zuma, Cody, Patterson, players that I think are good picks but not particularly exciting. A couple of interesting midfielders in this bunch as well. It's really difficult to rank the likes of Grealish versus the likes of Xhaka. I've got them pretty close, 110th and 115th, and they couldn't be more different really. And if they played the same amount of minutes, I don't think it would be close at all. Grealish would be far ahead. But, judging one player who has good expected output but low minutes versus someone that has full minutes and low expected output is really difficult. But I think this is roughly where I'd fit them in as it stands at the moment. I think the likes of Tielemans, Ward-Prowse, Aronson, Xhaka, Souček are all in kind of one bubble. But Grealish is someone that I find really hard to slot in because you never know when he's going to get a run of games. But as it stands from the information we've got at the moment, this is how I would have it. We've also here got the second tier of goalkeepers: De Gea, Kepa, Sarr, Sanchez, Pickford, Fabianski. All decent defences, but I don't think quite as good picks as the top tier. 126 to 150 then, kind of scraping the barrel here, but there are quite a lot of upside picks. These are the kind of players that I think you'll find on a decent amount of waiver piles. A lot of these players will feature in my waiver pick videos reasonably often because they are often undrafted. The likes of Elise, Tavernier, Mitoma, Somerville, all exciting picks I think that with the right fixture could always have a good week. We've also got a little bunch of boring defenders, the likes of Webster, Mings, Anderson. Again, boring, steady picks, good minutes, and with the right fixture could do you well. This is also around the time when you really start scraping the barrel with forwards, players that aren't guaranteed minutes, risks, players that aren't really performing. You've got players like Alvarez, who we just don't think is going to start, but would be a good pick if he did. Similar to Antonio as well. Adam Armstrong, never really been prolific. And Burmo, similar story. We've got Awoniyi and Johnson both here as well. Johnson down 94 places. He's really not performed to the level I'd hoped and expected that he would. Next up, we've got Mahrez, all the way down in 148th place. And, he could prove me wrong. He could definitely go back up the rankings easily. It only takes a run of games and he'll be right back up there. But he's just not getting the minutes, and he hasn't all season. He's tumbled down the rankings. He was 62nd in game week 8. I think I had him at about 20th at the start of the season. So it's been a real fall from grace, as his owners know. It's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. I can't justify putting him any higher with the minutes he's had so far this season. Finally, rounding it all out then, 151 to 176. We've got a bunch of goalkeepers, as always. The next tier in Ward, Henderson, Martinez and Gaeta. And then the very bottom tier at the end, Raya, Bazunu, Meslier, Neto and Leno rounding it all out. We've got a bunch of forwards that are definite minutes risks. Dennis, Welbeck, Mateta. And Ivan Toney, who I should probably touch on in a bit more detail, down 149 places, was ranked 16th in the previous rankings video, and that is roughly where I'd have him this time if it wasn't for this ban looming over him. We don't know any details still to this day. He may well even play in Game Week 17, which would be quite a turn up, but as of recording we have no information over the betting allegations that have been made against him. I think it seems quite clear that the FA have a lot of evidence against him. We're still waiting to see how he's even going to respond. We don't know anything at the moment at the time of recording, as I said. I suspect he will get a decent length ban. I've said this multiple times. When you look at his infractions versus the likes of Joey Barton, who did something similar, Barton got 18 months. We've seen Kieran Trippier get 10 weeks for not even placing the bet himself, but tipping off one of his mates. The FA take this very, very seriously, and I don't see any way Toney doesn't get at least a few months ban. I would be surprised to see him before the end of the season, but we'll have to wait and see. On that one, I can't give you any more information because I don't know it yet. Hopefully we'll get some more information before the Game Week 17 deadline. Surely we will, but we just don't know yet. And last players to touch on, a few midfielders that I think look like good picks if they could guarantee minutes, and that's Sinisterra, Buendia and Guedes, all in a similar bucket, not really guaranteed the minutes so far. Sinisterra coming back from an injury. And we've also got a couple of defenders here as well. Some boring ones like Kilman, Coleman, Chalobah I think could be a really good pick if he gets the minutes. Chilwell still not back from injury, and we still don't know if he's even going to play when he is back, if he's going to play consistently or not. And we've also got Henry, Veltman, me, fifth defenders, someone that will round out the end of your subs bench unless they've got a really good fixture. Okay then, that rounds up my full draft rankings. As I said earlier, if you want to see this spreadsheet in full, including all the tabs for all the different players so you can constantly look back and match them up, then you can join the Patreon because it's posted on there. The link for that is down below in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please do hit the like button. It really does help us. Share this with anyone that you think may find it interesting. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with Game Week 17 waivers in just a couple of days' time, ready for the big restart. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.